A lot of what we talk about is planned ignoring because so many behaviors that are maladaptive in some ways are adaptive in others. And by paying attention, you almost always increase the likelihood of that behavior.
We've all heard it, the yelling and the slamming doors that come with having our child stop doing whatever they're doing on a screen. Getting kids to turn off, put down, and unplug from their iPads and games. And then there's the sibling fights. For example, meltdowns when a younger child can't have the same time on screens as an older one is having. And then they're bugging the older sibling and the fighting. We know how important it is holding screen time boundaries, but it's just so exhaustingly hard. In today's podcast, we look at solutions when it comes to sibling conflicts and maintaining calm during screen-related meltdowns and how to extinguish them. And this show is particularly geared for parents of younger kids, which we're doing more and more work here at Screenagers because of our latest film, Screenagers Elementary School Age Edition, which is all about younger kids. So in this podcast episode, we start with hearing from Laura Kastner, a leading child and adolescent and family therapist and author of several incredible books, including one of my all-time favorites, Getting to Calm.
Laura, tell our audience a little bit about yourself.
I always say the only reason why I became a psychologist is I didn't get the hamburger hopper job when I was a teenager in this little farm town where I lived in Illinois. My mom said, oh, poor little senior in high school doesn't have a job. And so my mom got me a volunteer job at Southern Illinois University campus. They were children self-harming, bang their heads in self-stim and all those ways. And they had a token economy, which means you reinforce them with marbles for the extent of time that they can actually not hurt themselves. And you can extend it longer and extinguish the self-harming. And at the end of the day, or at the end of maybe a couple hours, they trade their marbles in for goodies in the grocery store. So it was the beginning of my understanding behavioral management. And then because I had that volunteer job, I got a job when I went to college in a residential home for children with mental health problems. And so I've been doing this since I was 18.
Wow. And when you say self-harm, just for our listeners, you're talking about little kids who were self-stimulating by hurting themselves?
Yeah, mainly banging their heads. It's intellectually disabled and emotionally disabled children that end up with that kind of disability, if you will. And it really extended to where even now, Delaney, with all of the mental health problems that we could talk about or parenting programs, a lot of what we talk about is planned ignoring because so many behaviors that are maladaptive in some ways are adaptive in others. And by paying attention, you almost always increase the likelihood of that behavior.
Paying attention increases the behavior. So give the marbles when a child is not doing the harming behavior. Rather than getting mad at them for doing the maladaptive behavior, try to ignore it. Planned ignoring. What a cool term. Planning in advance that I'm going to not focus on the unhelpful behavior, it's like mental muscle training. So when our emotions are high, we can think, okay, planned ignoring, so hard, but possible. And it definitely gets easier with more practice.
When I would say to my son, Cameron, don't shove Lindley, I just reinforced him for shoving his little sister. That's why don't talk to the perpetrator, have other tricks in your bag other than paying attention to the behavior. If you say, don't hit your head, they will hit their head more. All attention is reinforcing. So at age, I was 17 at the time, I learned the principle of, wow, you give attention to anything, even a terribly maladaptive in some ways behavior, like hitting your head, you're making the likelihood greater. Mm-hmm. We can go from that example all the way to parents going, don't hit your sister. Why do you always disrespect me? Why do you treat me that way? And all those things are paying attention to behavior that if it's a low level behavior in terms of harming self or others, you might just have increased that behavior. So that's why we have in especially with school, we always say catch them when they're good. Pay attention when they're doing the desirable behavior rather than pay attention with the undesirable. Sometimes you have to do it, like when somebody's hitting the sister, but it's better when it's low level stuff, like just a little elbow or poking or something, to say, oh, little sister, we love when a brother likes to play with us, but let's go over here and wait until he's ready to do that. You don't talk to the perpetrator, you talk to the, I don't like to call it victim, but talk to pay attention to anything but the perpetrator.
I like this wording, low level and high level, that when things are high level, hurtful or risky, we do direct our attention to it, such as a child who runs out into the street. Sure as heck, we're gonna direct our attention to that, not to punish them, but to show them how serious it is.
So I'm thinking of a screen time type of scenario where a little sibling is just haranguing the other one. I want the iPad to the older sibling. And so rather than direct the attention to the 5-year-old who is whining and bothering the older sibling, you would say to the 7-year-old with the iPad something like, oh, clearly you and I should move to the other room.
If the little one is doing the provoking, I'd say, oh, let's go to the rules that we all agreed on. I think it's over here on this whiteboard. I try to distract, redirect, talk about the rules. I might say, gee, I see blocks over there. I wonder what you're going to pick for your fun time. I would just say, gee whiz, what else can we do here? As I walk in the other direction and close the door on the 7-year-old with the tablet. Yeah.
But of course, we're trying to keep that in a public space, just to reiterate, ideally not in a bedroom with the tablet.
Yeah, it's a really good point, because we do like to keep screens out of the bedroom. For sure. I probably should have said move to a different part of the house. The idea is that it's my job, if it's his protected time on the tablet, it's my job to re-engineer whatever is available for the 5-year-old.
Mm-hmm.
But you're bringing up a good point, because we love to talk about screens in the public area, but how do we keep little ones away? Right? Mm-hmm. This is a big thing people bring up to me. I'm sure they bring up to you too. What do I do to keep the little ones away? Because they're often looking at material that's not appropriate for a toddler, an older child. I hear from a lot of people who say, fine, he's earned the right to do that video game, but I just dealt with this last week, but how do I keep my 8-year-old away from my 2 teenagers that are doing that? And so in that family, we have a closed room for that recreation, mm-hmm. a different room. And we have to do that. Otherwise, the 8-year-old would see, you know what, those gaming platforms look like at age 16.
Yeah. And so what did you guys talk about, or how did you handle that particular scenario?
By deciding that there should be a room in the house designated, the teenagers having the right to game in mm-hmm. a separate room. And that's the way they're going to keep the younger one, children away from the teenagers.
And of course, some homes don't have that much space.
But they have to keep the little ones away from those games. 16-year-olds can handle a lot that 8-year-olds can't.
Yeah. So what other ways? Obviously, it would be time of day. So that may be that the kids, the younger ones, are asleep, or some other way. If they don't have, I guess there could be exceptions that they can play the video game in a room with the door shut, is what you're saying.
Yeah, I'm just glad it's not in their rooms. It's a separate room. And
but in some households, in small apartment, it might need to be in a bedroom at that time for that video game.
Exactly, and then pull it out.
Let's turn to the screaming. I'm talking about tantrums and meltdowns that can happen when they can't have screen time.
It's really common for kids to sometimes have a meltdown when they have to get off their screens, their video games.
That's Liz Dexter-Meza, family and child psychologist, talking in a clip from the film Screenagers Elementary School Age Edition.
Extended amounts of screen time can tire out their brains, their prefrontal cortex, opening up neural pathways for their emotion mind to take over. And then if they have a tantrum and then the parents give in, we've now reinforced that high intense emotional display. If this time we're no longer going to extend the amount of time, that's when tantrums get louder. That's called an extinction burst. The brain starts to think, oh, they didn't hear me. I need to get louder. That louder is the extinction burst.
Extinction burst. I love that phrase. Think of the rat that was getting sugar water via a dispenser, and she goes up and licks at the straw, but then when the activity is not producing the sugar water, it's not forthcoming, she doesn't say in rat language, "Oh well, let me try later." Instead, she becomes frantic and tries so long to get the sugar water to reappear. Remembering that what's happening with our kids, it's normal biology playing itself out when kids get frenzied. It's a parenting mindset that can help calm our rising blood pressure when kids are in that high response mode.
Adults, we have to use our own distress tolerance skills until the brain knows that no matter how loud I'm going to be, that I'm not going to get the thing I'm wanting.
Distress tolerance skills like internally repeating to ourselves, extinction burst, or perhaps trying a habit that I love, power breathing. Power breathing is all about activating the parasympathetic nervous system in our body. It's one that I use a lot as a doctor with my patients. Many ways to activate it, but with breath, what we can do is breathe in for 3 seconds and breathe out for 5 seconds. It's found that this longer time to breathe out is particularly good at activating the vagus nerve and the parasympathetic system, which is all about a calmer, more relaxed mental and physical state. Let's turn to more techniques that can help make the transition off screens easier. I interviewed Emily Cherkin, a family coach and author of Screen Time Solutions, and let's hear some of her thoughts.
Roblox, that is a hard one to turn down because, the game is designed to keep going, right? Or Minecraft, there's no end. So I highly recommend sitting with your kid, sitting down next to them, maybe even a physical hand on their knee or their shoulder and say, "I'm sitting here now. We have 5 minutes left to play this. Would you please show me what you've built? Tell me what you're going to do later and what are you working on? And, let's go store things in a trunk, right? Which is Minecraft language, right? We have to speak their language so that they know we're paying attention. And it's like, I know this is going to be really hard to turn off. When you're done, maybe you could draw a picture of it. Any way that it's okay to use the screen as the bridge between screen and no screen, right? Like, I think that's fine. Get them books at the library about Minecraft. There's tons of them, right? That softens the blow. I also think it helps to prepare ahead of time. I know that when you have to turn off your phone or whatever it is, iPad, it's really hard. Your emotions are really high. Your energy is really high. So let's make a plan for when you're done. I'm not going to ask you to go clean up your room. I'm not going to ask you to do something right away. I'm going to give you 15 minutes or whatever to cool down, right?
Absolutely.
Where attention goes, energy flows, right? We want to give them the feedback of the behavior we want to see them repeating.
I like what you're saying. Sometimes for some kids, knowing nothing's going to come next can be like, you're just going to get free time. And then for some kids, it's like, and we're going to eat some food together, or remember, we're going to go do this. Like their brain kind of gets, there's an afterwards.
I think for some kids, that's extremely helpful.
Letting them know they have some control, have a choice.
Yes.
And in terms of preparation for the doing it,
Yep.
letting them know when it's going to end and whether that's a 5-minute timer, whether they get to put on a timer. Do you want me to tell you? Do you want the timer?
We have to be proactive about it. And then we celebrate the small wins. Like if it's a 20-minute tantrum one day, but the next day it's 15, we say, your meltdown was only 15 minutes today. I mean, it's backwards maybe in our mind, but like where attention goes, energy flows.
Like, wow, you showed a lot of self-restraint and self-regulation that you only were really upset for 15 minutes, not 20 minutes. You're already getting better at this, and it's not easy. Like, good for you. Like, hey.
Exactly.
Letting kids have ideas of what is next is, of course, a great way to deal with that transition time. For parents with younger kids, I want to share part of a conversation with a wonderful researcher, Caroline Fitzpatrick, who has been studying children's tablet use, like iPads and whatnot, and their development of emotional regulation skills. I will let her introduce herself.
I am a professor of child development at Université de Sherbrooke in the Department of Childhood Education. And I am also the Canada Research Chair on the impact of digital media on children.
Fantastic. So you're near Montreal?
Near Montreal, about 2 hours outside of Montreal.
And go ahead and tell us what the study entailed.
We studied children when they're aged 3.5, 4.5, and 5.5. And during this time, parents reported, amongst other things, the amount of time children spent using tablets and their tendency to display anger and frustration in their daily routines. So we used a measure, management of negative emotion scale, that's often measured as part of people's base personality or as a part of their temperament. For example, when you ask a child to stop an activity, do they react with strong negative emotions like anger and frustration? Or when you ask them to go to sleep or to pick up their toys, do they express anger and frustration?
And what did Caroline and her team find?
So more tablet use at age 3 was associated with more outbursts of anger and frustration by age 4. So that was finding. And then we found, following these same children over time, that by the age of 4, if you had higher levels of anger and frustration, then that predicted increased in tablet use by age 5.5.
Got it.
Children need to learn self-regulation skills. So if they're spending time on a tablet and if this is interfering with key important parent-child teaching and coaching moments about emotion regulation, or if parents are using tablets too often as a tool to calm a child down or to occupy them, this might interfere with their ability to delay gratification and to manage their negative emotions.
Got you. So primarily the idea is if they're on screens a lot, they're not having the opportunity to learn a lot of skills of handling frustration and disappointment and delay of gratification, partly because it is the kind of the pacifier, if you will. It is soothing those feelings, as well as it's taking away time for having the opportunity to practice in other settings. I'm thinking of the fact someone just told me at the preschool they go to, those parents who have their kid entering the preschool every morning holding an iPad, the crying at the separation time isn't because the parent is leaving, but because the parent is leaving with the iPad.
One recommendation is that parents should set up a family media use plan, ideally before children start using screens. A family media use plan should set limits on the amount of screen time, when we want to avoid screens, for example, during meal times or during the bedtime routine. And it could also set up some more specific rules based on family preference. It could be if the child's going to use the tablet, they have to turn off the device themselves after their program. Parents can also help children develop self-regulations by providing them with supportive and gentle reminders. You have 5 minutes left, you have 3 minutes left, so the child can prepare to disengage from the media activity. And maybe another very practical tool is parents can store the tablets out of sight of the child to avoid that constant reminder. And instead, they can store active toys, balls, crayons in the sight of the child to help them think about other activities and keep building skills by engaging in other activities.
My understanding from doing this work a long time would be to validate to that young kid, oh, I see you're frustrated, to name the feeling, oh, you seem really upset, and to say, that makes sense, to validate, to let them know you're seeing from their perspective. You really love playing on the iPad, and then becomes, but this is a boundary, or but we're not going to do that right now. Ultimately, it's really at that age, switching them over to get them engaged in something else. That is helping them to regulate their emotions.
Yeah, absolutely. It's delay of gratification, it's emotion regulation, it's self-regulation, behavior regulation, and you are absolutely right. Talking about emotions, labeling them, naming them are fantastic ways to help children learn eventual emotional competence.
Talking with Caroline, it's such a great point to hear about the idea about creating family screen plans for younger kids. Not just like we've traditionally always been talking about for phones, but actually tablets, consoles, having collaborative talks when our kids are really young about the amount of time and what they're doing is such a superb way to make it that much easier when they hit the tween years and things get trickier. Making it become the family norm that at times there are these collaborative conversations is a real gift to the family. If you go to screenagersmovie.com, the resource page, under Screenagers, the first film, you'll see a tab there that says Screen Time Contracts. There are some example contracts, and we've even added one for iPads and things for younger kids. I want to thank everyone on the pod today, Laura Kastner, Emily Cherkin, and Caroline Fitzpatrick, as well as Liz Dexter-Meza from the Screenagers Elementary School Age Edition film. And at our website, you'll find links to their bios, books, and research. What a gift that you tuned into the show today. The Screenagers podcast and movement is all about learning together how we can best help our youth of all ages, our communities, and ourselves best navigate our rapidly changing digital world. Make sure to follow/subscribe to the podcast to get each episode automatically. And the more subscribers, the easier it is for others to find us. And if you give it a like and write a review, even just one sentence, that helps even more. Check out screenagersmovie.com to get resources for each episode and loads of other resources. Learn about our 4 Screenagers films and find my weekly parenting blog, Tech Talk Tuesdays. And be sure to use the search bar to find many topics you might be wondering about among hundreds of my past blogs. Finally, I love hearing from you, so email me at delaney@screenagersmovie.com. What ideas do you want to hear for future episodes? Today's show was produced by the following people: me, your host, Delaney Rustin, Lisa Tabb, Rebecca Tolan, and sound editing was done by Alan Gofinski.